Can you tell us a little bit about how Andy died, and from your perspective, everything that kind of you went through on that day, or everything that happened?
Yes, it's interesting because he died by suicide.
Okay.
So there's so many misconceptions or misperceptions about suicide, and thinking that it's something that you can see, or that it's evident, or that maybe he was depressed, or what was he like? And that wasn't what he was like at all. So there really weren't any evident signs. In retrospect, looking back now, I can see some of them, but one would have just attributed them to normal teenage angst.
Yeah.
So he was 16 when he passed. It's a goofy age as it is.
Yeah.
And his was a culmination of really a lot of different things, but it was actually reported to the FDA. His suicide was caused by an acne medicine that he was taking, an oral acne medicine that I actually had to sign the waiver. And in the waiver, he started taking it about 4 months before he passed. The waiver said suicide, psychosis, and depression are potential side effects.
Wow.
I didn't even hesitate to sign it because Andy's a happy kid. I'm a really involved parent. So didn't even cross my mind. But what come to find out what had happened when his dermatologist reported it afterwards, he said that it affects the frontal lobe, which is where all their clear thinking is. And so any other thing that might be a normal teenage challenge, whether it being bullying or breakups or whatever that is, it's much more difficult to process when your frontal lobe is not thinking clearly. And so those impact you differently, and they become crisis in that sense, whatever they are. And there were several things that built upon. He did have a breakup with a girlfriend. He was being bullied by a teacher, and then he was bullied on social media by some kids just a couple days before he passed.
Wow.
So those for him, they were just, any one of them is difficult, but you stack them on top of one another, compounded with a drug that's interacting with your ability to process them. And he just couldn't. It was an instant moment that he wanted to just not have to be free of the pain.
Yeah.
Wow.
And in some sense, I think many of us can relate to some of those experiences too in high school, a breakup or being bullied. Some of it, I think that we in this room can't really relate to is some of the social media bullying that happened, because it didn't necessarily happen. MySpace was just barely coming out when we were in high school, and some of that wasn't as relatable. But yeah, those are generally experiences that us and adolescents, we all experience in that time frame in our life. Yeah.
It's why some of my other kids have really challenged. I would say all my other kids have been really challenged since Andy passed. And there are things that I'd like to write about it, but I also realize that even though that might be helpful, writing and talking about some of those things, social media leaves a lifetime imprint, whatever, of that. And I think it's super important what we're putting in print or putting out there verbally, to be so extremely cautious of that.
Yeah. Okay. So, take us again from like your perspective, where you were at, how you found out, about Andy's death, all of the details that way.
Yeah. I was at work, and Andy was super busy because of baseball. He had, just a very full schedule with all the stuff going on, everything. And so communication was key, and we would always talk right after school was out, kind of to make sure we were on the same page about where he was going that day, what was happening, what interaction he needed, what my part of that was going to be. And he didn't answer his phone. And so, I didn't overreact at that, but a little bit of time went by, 10, 15, 20 minutes, and he didn't call me back. He was never one to not call me back. We had great communication. And then I started just that, I don't know whether it's something inside of you that's telling you and preparing you for what lays ahead. I would attribute some of that, because I went into almost instant panic mode then. After about a half hour, started calling his friends and one of his friends said that he walked out of class after second hour.
Oh,
And I
wow.
thought, oh, that's a long time missing in action.
Yeah.
I was in full panic mode at that point and got in my truck to head home and started calling like his coach and some things like that. And I guess the teacher that day that he'd been bullied by had given him a full failing grade. He had great grades in every other class. She didn't like him. And so in his mind, it's December 11th, and baseball season, eligibility, coaches, scouts were calling him every week wanting to know what his GPA was. So in his mind, this is the end of his life. He's failed a class and he can't see any further beyond that.
You can't see a future in baseball
Can't see a future. And that was his life. And then he'd been bullied by a group of kids just a couple days before. So everything was piling in on him. And the fact that he'd been missing for 5 hours now without any accountability. And the school hadn't notified me. He'd never missed school, let alone walk out of a closed campus. So those would have been red flags at 9 o'clock in the morning when I could have done something about it. And I headed home. And as soon as I got home, I saw the first responders at my house.
Oh, wow.
So, and really he had only ended his life probably 30 minutes to 60 minutes before I got there. So it was fairly recent.
Oh, wow.
And then the rest of the story begins, the immediate response of just falling on the concrete. You're just, my world was over, and the screaming and the crying. And then it's interesting to me, even at the moment, as I thought, you do get up off the ground. And I think that's your first life-affirming moment after something devastates you. Because otherwise you just stay there. But we get up off the ground no matter what's happened to us.
Yeah.
And then we went over to the neighbor's house. They wouldn't let us go in our house. And all of Andy's friends started showing up. The coach had let everybody know. And so they started pouring into the neighbor's house. And I had a couple strange reactions. I had 3 that were really probably defining my journey forward.
Okay.
Seeing the kids there, I wanted to make sure that they understood that Andy loved them. And I didn't want them to follow in his footsteps.
Yeah.
I wanted them to know that because I still hadn't put all the pieces together. I didn't know what had happened. And so that was my response to the kids, was really one of trying to comfort them, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The second response that I think was super helpful for me was, I don't know about your community, but my community, the first thing that they want to do is offer you a drink or a Xanax when you're suffering. That's a pretty common societal response.
Yeah.
And I knew enough not to do that. I knew that I'm susceptible to alcohol. It's a depressant. I couldn't be any more depressed. Why would I want to add to that? So I pushed that away.
Yeah.
And I didn't drink for the first year after Andy died. Not at all. And then when I went into the bathroom after maybe an hour of being there, whatever, just to and I looked in the mirror to reconcile that this had actually happened to me. You're in this fog. And I said 2 things. I said, I will praise you in the storm, and I'm not the first mom to lose a kid. And those statements, I really felt like, even as I was saying them, I thought, this is really odd to come out of my mouth. I really do believe they were a divine download.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But they were decisions that I was making about my faith. I'm a woman of faith. So what better time to be faithful than when everything is shattered? And I'm not the first mom to lose a kid. What I didn't know it at the time, but what that was doing for me later would be, it connected me with a whole group of people so that you're not isolated in your suffering. I could identify with the suffering in the world so that I didn't feel alone in mine. That was really important for me.
The story doesn't end here. This is just a small segment of the entire podcast. If you want to check out that full podcast, tap or click the screen here. YouTube also thinks you might like this video. Remember, subscribe, shine bright, and we'll see you in the next video.